want to speak to Chris Quinn, who is the Children's Commissioner. Chris, good morning.
Morning, Frank. How are you?
I'm very well, Chris. Young people, this is so relevant. You know, I'll get through my life without a major impact of climate change. If I'm blessed with grandchildren, they may be more challenged than me. And the youngsters of today, they are worried, aren't they?
Yeah, well, it's quite timely, actually, that we speak today. We're involved in a big event this weekend at Caffrey College with some other organisations where young people will come together to talk about the issues of climate change and climate justice. So 2 years ago, the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child published a general comment which talked about the rights of the child to a clean, healthy and sustainable environment. Over 16,000 children across 121 countries contributed to that. But the key things are that children and young people are saying that governments aren't acting quickly enough. We need to invest more in sustainable ways of saving the planet, like renewables, like a move away from fossil fuels, and to protect our most marginalised people. Key to that is the voice of the young person and how we involve children and young people in this discussion. But they're very clearly asking for government to move more quickly to mitigate against the impact of climate change and the environmental disasters that we're seeing.
Well, the government across the water saying really that the target for net zero will deliver good jobs, economic growth, energy security. The opposition saying that it's almost impossible to deliver by 2050. You can't help but think that 2050, it sounds a long way away to many people. But, the last 25 years went in very quickly. The next 25 will go in equally as quickly. And by that time, we'll be there. And I can't envisage them being on target. Can you?
Yeah, well, the key thing is, I suppose, with many issues that I look at in terms of from a child's rights perspective, children can't wait. They can't wait until 2050. Children and young people have the right to grow up in a healthy, safe and sustainable world. And that means now. And climate change is not just an environmental issue. This is a child's rights issue impacting all areas of their lives. So there are things that we can do now. There are steps that we can take. And I suppose every year we see in Northern Ireland stories around Loch Ness, for example. We have really bad air pollution, actually. We've one of the worst areas in the UK for air pollution, and our rivers and waterways aren't in a great shape either. So we need our decision makers in Stormont to act now. And I would really encourage that the voice of children and young people is part of that decision-making process.
Yeah, and it's very important that things are done locally, because they talk about all politics is local, but my goodness, when it comes to environmental issues, everything is local. And you may argue what there are global entities that are not international entities that aren't doing their bit, but that's no excuse for us not doing our bit. We've got to influence those countries that aren't prepared to put their shoulder to the wheel.
Of course, yeah. And there's been various pieces of research that have looked at that were conducted over the last number of years in terms of young people's views on this. Young people have said that they do feel anxious about the lack of action. They feel that they have not been heard in the decisions that are made. But yes, you're absolutely right. There are massive things. There are things that we can control and things we can't. I would argue that Donald Trump and some of his policies are moving us backwards. I read last week that part of the Amazon, ironically, is being cleared for a road for one of the big COP meetings that's taking place.
I saw that report where they're cutting down Amazon rainforest to make a road to COP. It's madness.
It is absolute madness, Frank, and so ironic. But I think for us, it's about focusing on what we can change here. We do have our Stormont back up and running, thankfully. We do have a minister for DAERA who I feel is committed to these issues, and I think it's up to the executive as a whole to get behind him. You know, we talk a lot about resources and lack of, but environmental issues are an absolute priority. As I say, from a child's rights perspective, these things impact children's lives, and I've saw things as well around some of our schools, you know, in inner city areas, being close to roads and you know, air pollution issues, that children are breathing in this really unhealthy air during playtimes. So yeah, there are things that we can control and things that we can't, and I'm calling on our executive to listen to the voice of young people. Come along to our event. As I say, we have a big event in Caffrey, totally youth led, and young people will be there to tell us firsthand what they expect. And we would hope that at some stage we have some kind of a motion going through the Assembly on the issues that young people raise this weekend.
Well, one of the voices that will be raised will come courtesy of Oliver Mercer, who is an organiser and a participant in the Hear Our Voices event. He's on the line. Oliver, good morning.
Good morning, Frank.
Oliver, what will you be saying now? You know, just as you say hello to me there, you sound incredibly adult, but you've just turned 17, and you've got a voice that's very relevant to this argument, debate and discussion, because 17-year-olds are going to be much more impacted on than people my age. What is your message to the politicians?
Well, I think what's really important to me is that there's two purposes to this event. So one is, as Chris was talking about, and as you just said, sending a message to politicians that this is an issue for young people. It's an issue about young people. And in my opinion, the solutions will come courtesy of young people and their ideas, because they are key stakeholders in this. It's our future. But I also think that one of the really positive things that could come out of this weekend's event is about empowering and educating young people on the issues of climate change, because it can be so easy to get lost in the details of climate change and CO2 emissions that sometimes we forget that protecting the environment is as local an issue as it gets. So sustainable development isn't just a global issue, it's also very much local. We've very much got to hold our decision makers to account, and that's what we're hoping to do next weekend.
Do you genuinely believe, as a young person, that politicians here listen to the youth? In my honest opinion, I think it varies. You know, I think there are some politicians that do value the input of young people in their decision making, and I think there are those that don't. But what I would say as a message to those who would write off the opinions of young people solely on the basis of the fact that they are under the age of 18 is that, you know, this is our country too. These are our lives too. And we are as much equal stakeholders in our future as everyone else. And we have good ideas too. You know, the youth-led team that are taking this event, I mean, there are some fantastically bright people involved, and they've come up with some really creative ideas and innovative solutions that I think, if listened to and actually taken account of, could go far. And what would an example of one of these innovative ideas be?
So one of the things is really about trying to change the messaging. So the debate tends to be so much framed between the long-term interests of stakeholders like young people in sustainable development, in climate change and pollution, versus the short-term income of farmers. Actually, what one of the young people was saying to me at one of the planning meetings was that framing of the debate is completely wrong. And actually, it's not just the short-term interests versus the long-term interests of people, but also there's an economic aspect to this. You know, there's a long-term economic problem that's going to develop if we are careless with our land and with our water and with our air.
Do you mind me asking you, Oliver, which school you go to, which seat of academia you're currently in?
So I am in Upper Six at Inst in Belfast.
Do you know, it's just listening to you, and I've had other guests on the programme as well, 16, 17-year-old young men, young women, who, in recent times, who've been incredibly impressive in their delivery and the structure of their argument and just their presentation. Do you work on that in school at the moment? Is that something that is natural to you, or is it something that's nurtured within the school environment in this day and age?
I think that young people, in my experience, are all relatively bright and relatively articulate. I think there is an aspect of the school curriculum that promotes that, but I think we have an opportunity in schools to do so much more. In terms of confidence building, I mean, that would fall under something like personal development, which in most schools is relegated to 30 minutes to an hour a week, when really I think that should be the number one priority for schools. So yes, I think we do a good amount of it, especially at GCSE level. But I think by the time you get to A-levels, it does fall by the wayside a bit, and I think that's regrettable.
Yeah, the reason I mention it, because I've had other young guests on in recent times that have been equally impressive. I just think voices like yours and the other people who I'm thinking of at this moment in time, the politicians are much more likely to listen to them, if indeed to listen to your voice and the voices of others, if there's a structure in what you're saying. Not just, as they say, hurling from the ditch or shouting from the sidelines. You are thinking it through and you're delivering it in a way that is relevant to decision makers, because the bottom line is it'll be no time to you and your cohort basically are the decision makers.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. But what I would say is that I think it's important that we do listen to young people, however coherently they deliver their ideas. I think it's the responsibility of decision makers to listen to young people and to take their ideas and actually think about them critically, because I don't want decision makers just deferring to young people all of the time. I want young people to be part of the discussion, and where their ideas are good, they're incorporated, and when they need improvement or tweaked, or there's something that someone with more experience can say, I absolutely want them to say that. So I think, yes, there are, of course, bright and articulate young people that have really gone out of their way to get involved in these debates. But what I would say is that every young person, regardless of how articulate they are, has something to say, and that it's not just about how well or coherently they can deliver that. We should actually be making an effort to try and sit down with them in a way that they're comfortable and try to understand that. That's
an excellent point. It's very, very well made. Seriously, it is. I can't argue with a word of what you're saying. Oliver, best of luck with the project at the weekend, and this is at Caffrey. It's if people want to find out more about it, is there an online presence, or are you on social media around it, or online?
Yes, so if you go to the NI Children's Commissioners page, so that's just NICCY. If you look that up on Instagram or X, I believe, you can take a look at those and get some details about sign up there.